Today, I am super excited to dive into the critical topic of employee experience in accounting firms. Welcome again to Amplify, the podcast for accounting marketers. I'm your host, Mike Jones, CEO and Managing Partner of Resound, a brand consultancy for B2B professional services. And joining me today is Kassi Rushing, Vice President, Organizational Strategy and Employee Experience at Blue Hen Agency. She has over 20 years of experience connecting people, processes, and resources that are necessary to create an unrivaled employee experience and make accounting firm cultures their competitive advantage. She is also a designated thought leader with the AICPA SEMA Business Learning Institute. That is quite the commendation, Kassi. That's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. And I'm thankful that you're here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. Well, we're going to jump right in. I think it's important that we set some definitions. So as we're talking about employee experience, how do you define that? How do you tell, your clients and the people you're working with, how you define employee experience within a firm?
Yeah. So when we think about employee experience, I think it is directly tied to culture. And so when we talk about the culture of an organization, that for me is the day-to-day experience of the people in your organization, right? So culture is shaped by the attitudes and the behaviors of both the individual contributors, as well as the mission and the values and the leadership and the policies and practices of the organization. But when we talk about the employee experience within culture, I'm thinking about a few specific areas. I'm thinking about recruiting. I'm thinking about onboarding. I'm thinking about learning and development. So how are we growing our people? I'm thinking about how we communicate with our people, how we create connection, how we create belonging. And I'm also thinking about how we help them tie their individual purpose back into the purpose of the organization. So that's left to chance, often not a great experience. But employee experiences that are great are defined and designed. And so that's what we're seeing happening now. We've always had an employee experience. What we are shifting toward is intentionality in what we're creating as an experience.
I think your own personal experience is a really good testament to that. I think maybe share with our audience a little bit about how you even got into this field.
Sure.
Within accounting firms.
Sure. So I worked for 13 and a half years inside a top 50 CPA and advisory firm, and actually came in through the marketing door. I was a communication strategist, really worked in the public relations space. And the long of the short of it is I worked for a very visionary managing partner by the name of Joey Havens. He has since retired as the managing partner, but he came into that role and cast this amazing vision for culture and said culture would be number one at Horn. And that was great. I heard it and I wanted to be a part of it. But the problem was we didn't really have the processes or the people in place to bring it all to life. The communication strategist in me saw it part as marketing, part as HR, and then there was these gaps that nobody was filling at all. And he listened to that, and long story short, gave me the opportunity to define a new department. We called it People Growth and Engagement. And I leveraged my marketing peers, I leveraged my HR peers, and kind of worked right in between them all along the way to become the designer and then the, accountability person for the employee experience at the firm.
That's awesome. And you've since taken that experience and now you're applying that to lots of different firms. Is that right?
Yes. So a couple of years ago, as some of those transitions were taking place of my managing partner's retirement, it was the perfect time for me to move into more of a consulting role. And so I work in the profession every day. I have clients all over the country, and we really are moving into what I call culture by design with a real primary emphasis on the employee experience. So specifically, I'm helping them design recruiting strategy. We're thinking about what's our employer brand, what's our value proposition as an employer, and telling that story well. So very closely related to what our marketing peers do as they work to attract and keep new clients. But then we're also thinking about how do we grow our people? How do we make this a place that people want to stay and invest in the long term? And yeah, it's hard work and it's so much fun.
That's awesome. Why do you think it's so important that firms focus on that employee experience? I know we talk a lot about client experience.
Sure.
And I think sometimes we can maybe think that they're competing against each other, at least from a attention standpoint.
So I would challenge us to think about it as interconnected. I don't believe that we can ever have a client experience that's greater than the employee experience, because I believe how we serve our people becomes a direct indication of how they then serve our clients. And then I think it feeds into each other. So I was working with a firm recently, and they had brought me in to kind of solve some, we'll call them engagement issues. It was bigger than engagement issues, but with a group of managers, and they were really struggling. And at the root of it, they were struggling with the clients that they served. They had bad clients. And so this idea that if we deliver a great client experience and we can be proud of the work we're doing, it feeds into the employee experience, and the employee experience feeds back into how we serve clients. That is just interwoven. And we actually were talking about this before, COVID and before the pandemic. It is now even more critical though, because as everyone has experienced, geography is not really a challenge anymore to where you go for services. And so guess what? Neither is where you work anymore either. So the employee experience has to be great. We're all competing really on a national or international scale for talent now. So your offering to your people, it's gotta have a competitive advantage of some sort.
Yeah. And I think that kind of leads into another question is like, well, how do you build that employee experience to have that competitive advantage? What are the elements that are required to do that?
Sure. So anytime I talk with a client about this, I bring up 2 points to start. So you either have a culture by default or a culture by design. One or the two. And cultures by design win every time. But if you don't know what yours is, it's a culture by default. Okay. So that's kind of the first thing, is just knowing where you're starting from. Additionally, after you start to say, okay, we want to make our employee experience number one, which, by the way, I do strategic planning alongside Tom Hood in firms all across the country. And every single strategic planning I've done with him in the past year, culture and employee experience is the number one strategic priority in the firm. That used to be growth. That used to be, client experience. It is now culture and employee experience every time. So all that to be said, after, if you've got a culture by design or a culture by default, then the next thing is to really understand what you're starting from. I think a lot of firms and companies look out at the big shiny new program or initiative that they see someone else doing, and they think, we'll just do that. And that almost never works. We begin by thinking about, where are we? So, Jim Collins called it facing your brutal reality. Just where are we? And then understanding, who do we want to be? Really thinking about, what are our core values as a firm? What do we care about? What type of place do we want to be where people come to work every day? And how's that going to help us serve clients? And so that's kind of the starting point for all of it. So that sounds big philosophical, I know, but we take it.
I'm all with you on that. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had over the last couple of years where the lack of, a long-term vision and having a strategic plan really hampers the ability to kind of get everybody on the same page and saying, this is what we want to create. It's like, you can't make a house without the foundation. And so it's so many times I'm like, we have to work on a strategic plan. We have to get a vision in place. That's more than a year out, right? We got to be working at a higher level at some point here.
Absolutely.
So I'm all for it.
But then, when we start talking about the practicalities of an employee experience, it's all those things I named, right? So we start to dig in and we look at recruiting. We look at the day one experience. We look at what's training and onboarding like. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say that woven in through all of this is considerations around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. That for me is not a separate standalone initiative. That is just woven into how we're going to attract and retain and grow our people. So, and then the practicalities of all that. What are our messages to our people? How are we demonstrating accountability? How are we giving them the tools that they need to grow and develop? And it is exhausting work. And I think that's why it's never been quite the focus, is because it's not easy. It's not easy work. The firms that are doing it are making significant investments. And I don't just mean money. I mean, they are spending time and having hard conversations. They're looking at personnel right now. Do we have the right people in the right seats to do what we say we have to do to deliver a great employee experience? For a lot of firms, that really is taking a hard look at their managers. Managers, for the most part, as a blanket group in the profession, do not have the skill sets necessary to lead into the future. And so we know that leadership skills have been lacking, but we've not all paid attention to that the way we could have. And so we're seeing upskilling in that leadership space as a huge component of employee experience. Skills like empathy and listening and, integration of ideas, critical thinking, these things that we used to never talk about in the profession are front and center now.
Yeah. I mean, it's a proven stat over and over again, right? The number one reason that people leave their job is because of their manager.
Yeah.
Right? And the relationship or lack thereof.
Or lack thereof. Right. Right.
Yeah. And I think in our next episode after this one, we're actually going to spend some time digging into that on just management, right? And what does that look like? And how can you do that maybe a little bit better than you're doing it right now? And getting your managers focused on that. I love that topic. I think that's such a critical one. I think, we can talk all day about systems and processes, and those are really critical tools. But if they're not being employed correctly and well, in these relationships, right? At the end of the day, it's the relationship between the boss and the people that report to him. I mean, that at the end of the day, like creates, that's where the culture really hits the road.
That is your employee experience. And that is really what we try to help companies do, is understand that a vision statement or a mission statement on the wall is not enough. Your employee experience is, how does that come to life in my day-to-day? How does that come alive in my performance management process and the feedback that I get, the opportunities I'm given to grow and develop. And so it's bringing that big picture vision of who you want to be into the day-to-day acts that run your company. And at every intersection, there's an experience being created. So it's sometimes hard for people to wrap their head around, because it does feel like, well, that's just too much. But the reality is, we are seeing data. We're seeing data before COVID, but we've seen data since COVID. Research is showing that people who report having a positive employee experience have 16 times the engagement level of employees with a negative experience. And they are 8 times more likely to want to stay at a company. In today's hiring climate, that's a critical component. And I think a reason that people should be thinking about this. So it's personal. I mean, that's one of the things that COVID has really shifted, is what we're calling the individualization of the employee experience. And so, which is a challenge for HR. I don't want to pick on my HR friends.
Huge challenge.
But, my HR colleagues have really, spent the past however many decades making sure that equal and equitable were really closely aligned. And now we're seeing, coming out of COVID, that really meeting people where they are. Not that that wasn't important before, but because of the climate of hybrid and remote, and again, the competition for talent, it is no longer enough to have a couple policies or have a couple of programs in place and then wipe your hands and say, I've done what I need to do. It's just not enough anymore.
Yeah, and employees are in the driver's seat right now, right? So,
Absolutely.
they have
Absolutely.
all the power when it comes to like, hey, what job am I going to take and who am I going to work with and who am I going to work for? And,
Yes.
there's way more opportunities on the table than there is talent available. And so
Absolutely.
when you're in that kind of environment, it's funny. I'm a big basketball NBA fan, for better or worse. You can judge me. I'm all in on NBA and that's the only sport I care about anymore. But one of the things I've noticed, like over the last, like basically 15 years, they've had the same thing happen where players have really been able to more and more leverage their ability to have say in where, what team they're going to play with, even when there's a contract already in place. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about an industry where like, everything's contracted, right? And it's super negotiated and you have, strong unions and stuff that you're having to deal with on all those sides. And yet you still have players who are like, I don't like the team I'm playing with. I don't like the people I'm playing with. I want out. And if they have more leverage than they've ever had in the past. And I think that I've seen that kind of extrapolated into all sorts of other industries. And I think right now we're seeing that for sure in the accounting world. It's incredible. Like, I think in one sense, it's really cool. Like that individuals get to create experiences and kind of set up how they want to work in a way that's probably never been seen before in the history of the world.
It hasn't been. I really believe that we're going to look back on this time and, my children's children are going to study this the same way we talk about how Henry Ford revolutionized, manufacturing. I think we're going to talk about this the same way. It changed the world forever, and there's no going back. A colleague talks about there's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube, like it's out, and that's kind of where we are. But to your point, my firm I was with a few weeks ago, they kept talking about the war for talent and the war for talent, and I said, time out. There is no war for talent. The talent has won. And so now it is a talent market. And now we have to figure out how to become the employer of choice. Yep. And so this idea that, there used to be a war for talent, but the front lines used to be full of new recruits and they just aren't anymore. And I don't know how much y'all are talking about this, but there's also a major pipeline challenge in the profession right now. And so it's a struggle all the way around for a number of reasons.
Yeah, I think the data, I could be wrong on this. I think it's like a 7-year gap where basically they're not expecting to see the talent catch up to the opportunities that are, positions that are open really for 7 to 10 years.
Yes. And that's if all the things that we're putting in place right now are successful in helping to mitigate some of that. Yep. So this is not a short-term challenge.
No. And when you consider too, like it's almost probably never been easier to jump from one profession to another. You think about there's that issue. There's also like just getting, talent into, getting through accounting programs at universities, getting through CPA programs, just showing that, hey, this is a great career. This is something you want to invest your time in and do. And you can have fun doing it. I think that's something that's come up in a past episode.
Absolutely.
Where, this isn't just sitting there crunching numbers.
Well, and the reality is, for all of the angst and all of the very real challenges that are facing the profession right now, it is also full of opportunity. And that is what's exciting to me. That's what makes me want to do this work every day, is because we know that we can do everything almost that we need to do in a remote environment. We know how to leverage technology. We see the hard trends. We know what's coming for the big parts and pieces. And so we can create a future that just continues to elevate this profession. And that is super exciting to get to be a part of something like that. I think the employee experience sits at the heart of that, because I believe we can attract people into this profession that perhaps previously they didn't think it was a possibility if we can just make some tweaks and some shifts into how we think about things. There's some old mindsets that have to go with the employee experience. I don't have to see you to know you're adding value. Like that has this idea of management by walking around does not lead to a great employee experience. And there are others. There's a lot of things that we're going to have to let go of, and so we can hold on to something new.
I think that is a good segue into my next question. You brought up the word remote. It's the R word.
It is. It is.
Like every firm I talk to is really struggling through this at some level. Either they've, kind of just said fully embraced it and they're running with it and they're like, we're going fully remote. I think you have a lot of firms who are somewhere in the middle where they're like, I'm not sure I want to give up everything that we have when it comes to, having a headquarters and a location and a geographic, proximity. I think you have a handful of others that are just, stuck, right?
Sure.
Just like, I can't get out of that mindset. So as you're working with firms, as they're thinking through that portion of employee experience, how are you helping them, or what are you finding that's moving the needle in terms of getting them to see, oh, there is an opportunity to still maintain a really high level of culture? Because I think that's the pushback I always hear is, well, how do we have a culture then, right? If we're not all together, there can't be a culture. And I think there is a reasonableness to that question, right? I think there is an element of like, a lot of culture is developed around these kind of serendipitous interactions, right? I walk into your office and we have a conversation and it's either about work or it's about personal life or it's something else. And we walk out and we kind of feel like, oh, I have a deeper appreciation for you and you of me. And that is part of culture. And when you don't have that opportunity to walk into somebody's office, I think you have to think about it differently. So how are you seeing that work out?
Sure. Well, let me start by saying anybody who claims to be the expert in this area right now, we're still writing the rule books, right? Yeah. This is like flying a plane and building the engine at the same time. I think practically speaking, though, it's really important to think about this from a couple areas. So one, what motivates employees and what keeps employees engaged has not changed. I'm a big fan of the work of Daniel Pink. He wrote the book Drive 10 or more years ago. If you've not read that since COVID, I went back and read that a few months ago. It is more relevant now than it was then. Okay. And so he says a couple of things that I just want to remind you of. He says that autonomy, mastery, and purpose are really the key drivers for motivation. That is what gets your employees engaged and given that extra effort, that discretionary effort, that above and beyond. Those things haven't changed since COVID. We were just doing it wrong before COVID in many cases, right? I think going forward, what this gives us the opportunity to do is really tap into that autonomy piece, right? When, where, how I work, what I work on, who I work with. Companies that are doing this well, I believe, are making that truly a collaborative conversation. So there's clear expectations about the types of projects or the types of work we might want to be together for. But we don't necessarily have rigid boundaries around you have to be in the office X number of days, you have to be in the office on Tuesdays, that kind of thing. So as a practical example, we believe with one of my groups that onboarding a new employee, that the first 90 days are really critical for their success. And so we talk to them and we say, this is a hybrid position. You can do this how you want to do it, when you want to do it. But for the first 90 days, our expectation is that you are in the office more than 50% of the time. And here's why that matters. Because side by side, I can help you, I can coach you, I can catch mistakes, and I'm going to help you be successful faster. So people aren't unreasonable when they know the why. So that's just one example. But, putting boundaries around things like the types of in-persons that matter. It matters if we're brainstorming, if we need to solve really complex strategic problems. Do we really need to be live and in person for a weekly project management meeting? Probably not. So those are I think the firms that are doing it well are going down that route of when does it make the most sense for us to be together? Now, there was some research that came out maybe 6 months after we all went home in March of 2020, and it was predicting that teams needed to be together probably about twice a year to really maintain that culture. I have not seen that redacted or revised, and I think that probably feels right, because what I have heard as real life experiences from employees who are being told you have to be in the office Tuesdays and Thursdays or whatever is, well, I go into the office and I sit in my workspace and I still Zoom with people for meetings, and I'm not even necessarily talking to people. So if we're going to create rigidity around when, where, and how we work, we're going backwards. We're not capturing the opportunity. Okay. Yeah. Mastery, that has always been a component. Can I be great at the work that I do? You still have that opportunity, right? I think in a hybrid environment, the challenges are around feedback, getting the feedback. So I'm talking about appreciation, coaching, and evaluation feedback. To your point, it used to be so easy. We'd walk out of a meeting together and I'd pull you aside and say, hey, Mike, I've got some coaching feedback for you. Are you open? Let me tell you something I observed. Let me tell you what I'd like to see you do differently next time. We have to be super intentional now to make sure that type of coaching feedback is happening in the moment, but it's not impossible. And then you go purpose. I mean, we know that being able to tie individual purpose to the bigger purpose of the organization is critical. That was true before COVID, right? So I think that there's a huge opportunity to just recalibrate. It's really about how the work gets done, not so much, while we're doing the work or what we're doing. It's just how can we do it differently? And part of a great employee experience comes into play right here, because this is where executives get stuck. They go, well, how are we going to do it? You know what? What if you don't have to have the answers? What if you pose that question to your people, right? What if you open the door and say, help us solve this problem? And it is amazing what a group of really talented people who have a defined problem to solve, what they can come up with when given the autonomy to do that. So just to give some relief to the C-suite leadership out there, you don't actually have to have all the answers. Like, this is the perfect time to let your people help you write these new rules of engagement.
Yeah. And I think there's even an opportunity to just, try stuff, right?
Absolutely.
I think there's never been more acceptance of we don't have it all figured out.
Right.
Clearly we don't. And we're working in an environment that doesn't allow us to figure it all out very, very well, because things keep changing on us. And so I think there's some grace in that a lot of, staff have, and they go, yeah, you're trying something new. Let's see how it goes. Right. And we'll flex. Right.
Absolutely.
You don't have to have this very rigid policy right on day one and say, we have it all figured out and here's all the details. And no, it's just say, we're going to communicate. We're going to be transparent about what we're trying. And we're going to say, hey, we'll tweak it as we go.
Yes. And if all else fails, call it a pilot, say it's for, 3 months, and then go from there.
Yeah. And I think for our listeners who are in the marketing side, we know how this works. I think I can't tell you how many marketing directors I've talked with, work with, who this is how they get, acceptance on almost any initiative is, let's do a pilot. Yes. Let's try it with a small group of people. Let's build some momentum, and then we'll get, firm-wide adoptance of it down the road.
Yes, absolutely. But I do think that this idea of letting your employees speak into this is huge. In fact, when I do sessions, I was with the G400 community recently and engage. And, I always say to them, okay, here's the data. Here's what we're seeing. Here's what you need to know. Okay, now throw all that out the window, because that only matters if you can localize it to your people. And so use these big data sets as directional, questions to ask, but you need to figure out your own people, because I think sometimes too, we take these really big surveys and, these national sets of data, and then we're creating or crafting things for our employee experience that aren't relevant to our population. And so you have to know your audience.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't tell you how many times, even in my own firm, I've tried things with employees and thinking like, oh, they'll really appreciate this new benefit or this new initiative that we're going to start. And you get, 2-3 months in and you're getting feedback like, I appreciate the thought behind it, but this doesn't really benefit me in any kind of way.
Right.
And we go, man, why did we spend so much time trying to figure that out? Should have just asked them what matters to you. I think, and that goes back, I think, to your point about the individualization too, of how can you, and this is really hard. The bigger you get, the harder this becomes to manage, but how can you individualize that experience as much as you can within reason, right? And giving individuals the opportunity to say, this is what's important to me, and then delivering what's important. That doesn't mean you have to deliver everything, right? Because at some point, like if you deliver everything that they want, it's probably not going to work out, right? And I think it goes to another question of, okay, devil's advocate. I know there's partners out there who are saying, yes, but I get these ridiculous requests. How do I deal with that? People want stuff I just can't give them or just feels too much.
Yeah. And so understand you're playing devil's advocate here. And so I'm going to play with you.
I'm totally playing devil's advocate. Yes.
But what I will tell you is that is the question that always comes up. I can almost never get an actual example of when that's happened. Right. And so it's like, those are situations where, it could be really easy to do nothing in fear of this being an outcome. Or if it does, it's going to be a 1 or 2 off. And then we sit down like adults and we have a really maybe difficult conversation, or maybe it's just a really straight to the point conversation. Maybe we learn something that changes our mind, or maybe we just say to that employee, look, thank you for sharing your idea. We've done, the due diligence around this, and it's just not a cost-effective solution for us at this time. I have no doubt that there are some employees out there, given the working mom situation, that would love to open on-site daycares at every single employee, location in the country. That is not feasible for everyone. But you know what? What could we do? That's a great question to ask instead. Well, we can't do that, but what could we do? I'm starting to see firms that are subsidizing childcare. I'm starting to see firms that are offering emergency day childcare. So,
there's other options. It's a
yes and approach, right?
Exactly.
Or a no but approach, right? So the reality is, yes, you may get 1 or 2 of these. They will not be your norm. Most employees understand we have a job to do. We have a client to serve. Revenue and profitability matter. Most people, especially in this profession, this is a profession of extremely smart people. They get that. It is important that we set the boundaries around, what we're going to do as an organization and what our expectations for you are in return as an individual. So I can't wrap up an employee experience conversation without also talking about accountability, because when we talk about hybrid and we talk about remote and we talk about, doing things the way you want to do them on your time, the employee experience of the future, I believe, is self-directed and highly accountable. So employees have to be highly accountable in this process. But it's a cycle. Clear expectations have to be set by the organization and by a manager. And then it just goes around and round and round for the duration of your employment at that firm. And that's where great employee experiences really happen, is when I know what's expected of me. I have the tools, the resources, and the relationships around me to achieve that. I'm rewarded for that. I'm held accountable if I drop the ball. And then the new expectations get set, and I grow and I'm promoted, and it's just a circle and it goes round and round. So it's not as difficult as we might want to make it, but it's also not easy.
No, it's definitely not. And I know a lot of firms out there are feeling that right now, but I think today's conversation is going to help a lot of them. Hopefully, if they're listening, they're taking lots of notes. So. I was taking lots of notes. I was like, man, there's things in here I need to take back to my team and talk through. So Kassi, this was awesome. This was fantastic. It was a great conversation. And I think there's like so much more we could unpack, and maybe there'll be another episode at some point that we can keep diving into this, because we touched on so many things. This was awesome. Thank you so much for providing your insights, your experience, just the smarts that you have around this stuff when it comes to employee experience. And I really hope that our listeners were listening well and got some really good things. I know I did. Is there anything coming up for you that you might want to point people to in terms of something to check out or something interesting that might be helpful for them, especially as they're thinking about their employee experience?
Yeah, definitely. So a couple things, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. So I'm just Kassi Rushing, Kassi. Also on Instagram at Moms Make Great Leaders. I have a passion and an affinity for working moms because I am a working mom. And then the AICPA released a toolkit that I wrote recently, and it's about using leave as a retention and reentry strategy. And that is not just for working moms, but it does help working moms, but it's also for anybody who's needing to take a break without leaving, if that makes sense. So that's online. You can just Google AICPA leave as a reentry toolkit and it will pop up for you.
That's great. And we'll try to get those links up as well on the show notes so everyone can find those if they want to find out more and connect with you, Kassi, which I highly recommend that people do.
That would be great.
Thank you so much for coming on. And for all of our listeners, thank you for listening in on another episode of Amplify, the podcast for accounting marketers. Thank you for listening. If you like this episode, would you please consider giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcast, wherever you found this episode? It would really help us out. It would help others find this show who might get some help as they're thinking through marketing and now HR and different aspects of accounting. If you want to find out more about Amplify and all of our episodes, head over to accountingmarketing.org. You'll find the podcast under the publications menu. You can check out all of our back episodes there. If you want to find out more about me and my brand consultancy, Resound, head over to resoundcreative.com or email me at mike@resoundcreative.com. And until next time.